how to make your house heat pump ready. Now, my thinking is that we all need to prepare for this because there's going to come a time when your gas boiler will break down catastrophically, and there's not going to be many other options apart from replacing it with a heat pump or some other electrical device, some of which are in development at the moment. So I thought, well, it would be good if everybody had a bit of a strategy. It's not going to work for everybody, but it's going to work for quite a lot of people, of how to just slowly ease their way into making it their homes a bit more ready for when a heat pump is installed. Because if you just put a heat pump into your current house, it's not going to work very well. So what I did was I built a little 3D model, which I'm going to upgrade as I go along. I've chosen what is a fairly standard 1930s semi-detached house. I know not everybody lives in a house like this, but there's an awful lot of them around. So I thought this sort of deals with quite a lot of the issues, because this age of house doesn't tend to have a cavity wall. So you have to do other things. So the question was, right, how are we going to do this? So I've got these two guys who live in this house, this pair of semis, and you can see it's just an ordinary pair of semis, nothing very special about it. So you've got Colin's house and Kelvin's house. Now, obviously, with a name like Kelvin, he's quite interested in the environment, so he wants to do something about it. And so he decides to look into what he should do. They're both worth the same amount of money. He decides, what shall I do? So he decides he's going to start by looking at his roof insulation. He probably got a little bit up there already, but it's probably nothing like enough. So he starts off by saying, oh, put in 6 inches of insulation, 150 millimeters. He puts that in, and you know what? I could double that. It's not cost very much. So he puts in 300 or a foot of insulation into his roof space. Now that is really worthwhile. It's not a huge amount of money, and it will make a big difference. So that's a great way to start. Then he thinks, well, I've got some of my windows have been upgraded in the past. They're double glazed, but I'll just finish that job off. I'll make sure that maybe the front door needs to be upgraded as well, because a lot of doors are very, very leaky and have almost no insulating value. So he does a bit of work on them. And then he thinks, right, I need to sort out the drafts in my house. So he deals with chimneys that he doesn't use, and he doesn't seal them up completely, but he stops the drafts getting up them. There's all sorts of ways of doing that. You know, some people put rolled up newspapers into a polythene bag. That's a little bit dodgy if you go and light the fire by mistake. But you know, the concept is to just make a lot less air go up the chimney. He seals up round his doors and windows. He replaces the letterbox with a letterbox that you can't get the post through. Maybe you should just put a letterbox on the outside and not have one in the door. And looks for anywhere else that the drafts are getting in. One of the places where I'm always astonished is that if you, on a windy day, if you just go around feeling round doors and windows, put your hand over electrical sockets. A lot of air comes in through electric sockets, and sometimes you can just deal with that by, you know, these little baby plugs that you put in to stop toddlers sticking their fingers in the electrics. That'll help a bit. And you know, using a little bit of mastic around all the places where you can feel the drafts coming in. One of the big places that I've found as a problem is underneath windowsills. When people replace windows, they often don't deal with underneath the windowsill, and you get an absolutely huge amount of air pouring through there. So just have a good feel around on a windy day, or a few windy days here, because the wind comes from different directions, and see if you can feel where the drafts are coming in, and just reduce them as much as possible. Then he thinks, oh, well, what about underneath the floor? Because lots of air comes in through under the floor, because most houses have timber floor joists. This is a bit trickier because there's different things you might have to do. Kelvin decides he's going to put some insulation actually between the joists under the floor. but that's not necessarily all that easy. It really makes a big difference. I've got a friend who did that, and it absolutely reduced his heating bills by a vast amount. But actually, what the University of Salford discovered is that if you put down a really, really good quality underfloor, under, you know, what's it called, underneath the carpet?
Underlay.
Yeah, a really good quality thick underlay under your carpet. Actually, that can make a significant contribution. It's nothing like as good as insulating it, obviously, but I mean, it's quite trendy to have have your floorboards bare and sanded. Well, that's the worst possible scenario because they just let it out a huge amounts of heat through that. So he's done that. And he thinks, okay, what next? Well, obviously, he thinks it would be good to insulate the walls of my house. One of the easiest spots is, if you haven't got a cavity wall, is external gable wall insulation, because often there's very little in the way of the insulation on the gable. You could also put it on the rear elevation while you're about it, because they're often quite simple. There's usually not bays and things like this. But in Kelvin's case, he thinks, well, actually, if I'm doing all this work, maybe I should just put a well-insulated extension on the back of my house too. So he puts this extension on. Unfortunately, his architect doesn't really think very carefully about this and puts two enormous roof windows in the roof of the extension, when actually it's not a very good idea, because you lose an awful lot of heat through them, and sometimes it makes the space underneath them very uncomfortable. So you're probably better with using a little sun pipe, which lets in loads of light, but actually it doesn't, you don't have the same heat losses, so it's lovely. I've got one of those in my house, and I was away on holiday, and my daughter was living here with her family. She phoned me up and said, Dad, I can't turn off the bathroom light. I said, which one? She said, the big one in the middle of the ceiling. I said, you can't turn that one off, that's powered by the sun. So they really look like fantastic lights. So after he'd done that, he then does the insulation of his walls. He remembers to move the soil stack out, because if you just insulate round things like that, then it actually can cause problems in the future. So the people who do these things, if they're reputable folks who know what they're doing, they will take everything off the outside, insulate the wall, and then put it back on, you know, sort of on the outside of the insulation. And that is really important that people do that. So when it's ready for his heat pump and his gas boiler breaks down, ta-da, he sticks the heat pump in. Fortunately, he's remembered to leave somewhere on that back elevation where he can actually place the heat pump. Sometimes people put great big wall of glass across the back of their extension, then there's nowhere where they can put the heat pump. So it's worth bearing that in mind as well. And there we go. Kelvin's house is ready to roll. Obviously, the front of the house still is just brickwork. He could have insulated that. It's quite a lot harder. The bay and everything can make that difficult. It is worth doing, but of course, in some streets, you can't do it because if it's a conservation area, then you will absolutely wreck the street scene. And thin internal insulation is coming. At the moment, it's available, but you can't afford it. But in the future, I'm suspecting that the price of that will go down dramatically, and then be able to insulate just with, you know, sort of an inch of very high performance insulation on the inside. So there he is, he's done. He pushes a few PV solar panels on the roof. He could have done that at the beginning or the end, it doesn't really matter, but in this case, that's when he does it. So did he get it right? What about the cost? Well, obviously the total cost is a lot of money, but he did put a £25,000 extension on the back. So this has cost him less than £30,000 to do all the work. And if you're doing this in a strategic way over a long period of time, you can maybe get away with doing, you know, it not costing a great deal every year. And I think that's really why I've written this presentation, to say, do a bit at a time. and decide what you're going to do. His house value will have gone up above his next door neighbors because he's done some good stuff to it. So you can see it in terms of investment. And on top of that, of course, every year he's saving a load of money. And every year he does a bit more, he'll save more money. He'll live in a more comfortable house. It'll be less drafty, and he'll also be helping to save the planet. So that's a very quick run through of what I think is a possible strategy for somebody thinking about the future. If you say, I'm going to live in this house for a long time, then I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to upgrade it step at a time, so that when the heat pump, when the gas boiler goes, I can actually just put a heat pump in without too much hassle, without having to change all the radiators and spend a lot of money that actually might not be necessary if you've done this stuff first. Okay, that's me.